Excited to have everybody here. Now, I want to say we're going to turn the house lights up real quick. One thing we want to do before we bring out our next speaker is just get a picture of everyone showing as much excitement as they possibly can to be here at the Startup Grind Global Conference. So we have Dino, who's an amazing photographer. He's going to take some great shots. They'll be available on social media, I'm sure. But everyone, please stand up for a second. Take all your bags and laptops and stuff out of your laps. Do a little of this. Turn and stretch back and forth. Yep. Raise your hands up. Do some calisthenics. All right. Now, on three, what we're going to do, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. I want everybody to yell Startup Grind back at me. All right? Has everybody got that? Not too complicated?
Okay.
All right. Ready?
I'm ready.
1.
I want some hands too and stuff. Okay.
Yeah, so make sure, go crazy. 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 Ready? 1, 2, 3. Startup Grind! That was terrible. That was awful.
We need to do it one more time.
What are you guys doing? Jeez. I thought you were excited to be here.
The lights a little bit down.
Oh, can we turn these lights down just a little bit on the sides here? Our amazing tech team, if they could just turn the side lights down a little bit.
Okay, it doesn't matter.
Okay, cool. So, this time around, when I say 3, I want you to yell the name of the city that you arrived here from. Could be Sonoma, could be San Francisco, could be Redwood City, but we have people from all over the world here. So, when I say 3, yell the name of the city that you came from to get here. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Whoa! That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you very much, everybody. All right, so go ahead and get settled. Now, I'm sure that you're excited for our next speaker. I know I've been excited for this one for a very long time. Let's go ahead and settle. 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 So, our next guest truly needs no introduction. I'll simply say that he was named as one of the 100 most influential people by Time magazine. And in 2015, Inc. named his company the Company of the Year. Now, so for people who are here in the audience, I want you to raise your hand if you've ever created a Flickr account. Just go ahead and raise your hand. Now, with your other hand, raise it if you've ever created a Slack account. Wow, that is almost everybody. So look to your left, look to your right, and please put those hands together for Stewart Butterfield and Andrew Braccia from ACCEL Partners.
Go this way? Oh, okay, cool, thanks. Wow. This is pretty intimidating.
Very intimidating.
You always wanted to be a thespian?
Yep. Very nice. Okay.
Whew. What do we do now?
You're going to ask me some intelligent, insightful questions.
Okay. Raise your hand if you know the backstory of Stewart Butterfield. Does anyone know it? All right, good. That's a good first salvo then.
Okay.
So I'll do a little bit differently. Tell me the 3 most important things that you learned living in a commune as a young child in British Columbia.
I don't know that I learned anything because I left when I was 5 years old, so there wasn't a whole lot of time to learn.
Good point.
But I do get told things from after. My grandfather came from Poland between the wars with $20 in his pocket and didn't speak English and raised a family and sent his kids to college. And then his daughter, my mother, ends up being a hippie. And he goes to visit her and there's a bathtub in the front yard and chickens running around. And he's like, I left the shtetl in Poland to give you this life. So I don't know. I learned that I like to be around technology.
Tell us or the audience a little bit about from the time you left the commune at 5 and started to enter into a more predictable, civilized world. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
In 1992, so I'm almost 43 years old. 1992, I arrived at university and got an account on the school's Unix machine and discovered the internet. So then there was technically a World Wide Web, but it was very nascent, and no one I knew had heard of it yet. But there was what was called Usenet, which was news groups, like a bulletin board. There was a program called Talk, which was instant messaging, but you could see people send a character at a time. There was email, and there was a program called IRC, which was like group level chat, which is, by the way, fast forward, whatever that is.
23 years?
Yeah,
20 years?
that's the basis of Slack. But the internet just completely blew my mind and became an obsession and a fascination. And it's one of those things that I think that we're not, as a species, going to really realize the importance of for another couple hundred or maybe a couple thousand years, because I think it's as big of an impact as the development of written language, in terms of what it's going to do to us. So I don't know if I felt the magnitude of it then, but it definitely became a real fascination. And when the web became a thing, kind of like 1993, 94, my summer job all the way through college was making web pages. And then suddenly, in the late 90s, I was already a senior designer because there wasn't anyone who really knew how to do stuff then, and worked through the dot-com era. After the crash and WorldCom and Enron and 9/11, started a company to build a web-based massively multiplayer game, which was a terrible time to do it. Raised a little bit of money from friends and family, but really couldn't get anyone interested in this. Like, no one was interested in investing in internet stuff in that period, 14 years ago. And especially no one was interested in investing in consumer-facing things. So out of desperation, we made Flickr. And that kind of was the beginning. 2004, early 2005 was the beginning of this kind of renaissance of software development and web communities and all the Web 2.0 stuff that had been on a hiatus for like 4 years since the crash. Went to go work at Yahoo, where I met Andrew. And after they acquired Flickr, spent 3.5 years there, started a company with more or less the same group of people to try the same project again, build a web-based massively multiplayer game, failed again.
You convinced me that it was going to work this time.
I convinced you, sucker, and Andreessen Horowitz, and a couple other people. We raised $17.5 million, which was just totally outrageous, but very different time than 2002, 2009, 2010, 2011. But yes, failed in almost precisely the same way to do almost precisely the same thing, except this time with a lot of money instead of no money. And again, kind of out of desperation, tried something else, and the something else worked.
So one big area that we skipped was, philosophy, liberal arts. You see a lot of discussion today about the need for people in science and math, and you took a different route educationally. And as you think about, the foundation of what you've built technologically, talk a little bit about how that impacted what you've developed and how you've thought about building technology over the last decade or so.
That is a good question. I was actually talking about this earlier with a group of employees at Slack, but primarily engineers. And there's discussion about pay transparency inside the company. So some people think it would be better if everyone knew everyone else's salaries, and other people think that would not be better. One of the things to consider in that decision is that engineers get paid, I don't know, maybe like 40% more than people in finance. And the people in finance, went to the same good school, have the same student loans, have the same kind of family obligations. And by the way, they're just as nice and smart and hardworking and like collaborative and humble as the engineers are. In fact, in many cases, more so. But the engineers get paid 40% more. And why is that? Well, because if we didn't pay them more, then we couldn't employ them. They would go work somewhere else. That's just the kind of the market force. I am a believer in a liberal arts education and kind of understanding people as people because, and this is not at all to denigrate the amount of skill that goes into engineering or the importance of it, but at one point, the people creating the vast amounts of wealth and transforming society and blah, 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 were the railroad people. And civil engineers was, that was an in-demand, very high-paid job, and we should encourage our children to get into civil engineering programs because you could build railway trestles and stuff like that, which is, by the way, super hard and complicated. But now we're in this weird place where they built the $8 billion second Bay Bridge to be earthquake resistant. I have no idea how you could figure out how to make a bridge earthquake resistant. I'm sure it's very hard. The amount of training is the same, but those people probably get paid half as much as people working on search at Google, the engineers working on that kind of bridge. So there'll be a time where this kind of engineering becomes more routine. It becomes like part of a job that people do. But I think there will always be a demand for understanding human beings. If you're going to make software that human beings are going to use, it behooves you to understand them. And there's 4 co-founders of this company. I have a couple degrees in philosophy. One of the best engineers I know is one of my co-founders, Eric Costello, who has a degree in English literature. And so we have some super verbose and hilarious error messages trickle like kind of hidden into the software. But I do think it's really important. And I also would say that I would encourage people with those backgrounds, whether that's psychology or economics or history or literature, to that there is room for them, because engineers by themselves, I mean, then some engineers are great at understanding people and some are lousy, but on the whole, I think there needs to be kind of a yin-yang complement.
So when you think about your path and really the founding team's path of Slack over the last 10 to 15 years, I mean, one word that really comes top of mind for me is resiliency. And you look at what you went through to create Flickr, what you went through to create Slack. A lot of people here in the audience and beyond aspire to be great entrepreneurs. Talk a little bit about what motivates you and what drives your desire to build companies and to be an entrepreneur, and how does that take you through really challenging times?
Fear.
You make it look easy.
Yeah, well, thank you.
You fail really
what motivates me is fear of humiliation, I guess, and seeking approval. Probably the same as everyone here. But in the question of resiliency, of not giving up on something, it's really tough, because one of the things you try to avoid all the time is the fallacy of sunk costs. You've invested so much in this, and in one sense, you got to show up to win, right? So you got to if something is going to be successful, it's because you're putting your weight behind it, because you're really making an effort. And on the other hand, just throwing good money after bad, or good time after bad, or good energy after bad, at some point just doesn't work. And most startups fail, and it's almost impossible in the moment to have any idea whether you're just chasing some sunk cost. You're I've already put so much of myself into this, or put so much of our time and money or effort into this thing, and I got to keep going, versus this plainly does not work and we should stop. And you only really know the answer to that in retrospect. I think if you stop, it'll always bother you and you'll always wonder. On the other hand, you talked about resiliency, we did stop twice, right? We just said, okay, this game is not working. We're going to do something else. And I remember the last time, we still had $5.5 million in the bank. We had a couple 100,000 people using it. We had, some of the metrics were pretty good. But it was just clear that it was never going to be the kind of business that would justify that kind of venture capital investment. It would never be the kind of business that was successful according to the terms that we had set up for ourselves. And so we had to make the decision to kill it. But a lot of those you don't have enough information, but you still have to make a decision, and a lot of that is gut. And I assume that when you ask the question, what motivates you, you're looking for a more inspirational answer than fear of humiliation, but I'm a pretty honest guy.
Yeah, I was looking for something a little bit more.
Yeah, come to Startup Grind.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about, I don't think people have as much insight into that period of time where, I think it was November in 2012, if I remember correctly, when you and your co-founders decided to move on from Glitch and shut the company down. Talk a little bit about that process and what you went through as a company, how you handled that as a company, and how that at some level drove a lot of goodwill into the community that I think at some level initiated a bit of a spark for Slack as you came out with that product in 2013.
Yeah, I think that's true. So so first of all, how many people here have ever been part of a startup that went out of business? Just hands up. Okay.
You're not trying hard enough.
Yeah. It's a little bit bright, so I can't see, but it looked like, probably like 5 to 10% of people or something like that. So you've been on one of two ends of that. You've been on the end where you're the one shutting it down, or the one losing your job. And both ends of that suck. And to be a CEO, to be a founder, you have to convince a lot of people to believe in you, whether that's go out and tell your story to the press and get them to believe it, to try to get customers and get them to believe it, to try to get investors. You got to tell them the story and make them believe it. And most of all, employees. You have to find a team and you have to convince people. So to have to stand up in front of a group of people and tell them you no longer have a job is horrible. I mean, I don't want to underestimate the degree of horribleness it is on the other side of that, but it's, when I got up in front of the company and said that we were shutting the game down and that 37 out of 45 people were getting laid off, I locked eyes with this one guy who had just moved to the city 3 months before. He moved away from the city where his in-laws lived, and the in-laws were contributing to taking care of his, I think, 8-month-old daughter. Uprooted his whole life and bought a new house so he could come work here, and now he doesn't have a job anymore. And that's it's one thing to kind of let people down because you were late for a party or something like that, or you forgot their birthday, but this is letting people down in a whole different way. So I really can't in this case, there was kind of a happy ending because we ended up hiring him back later, and he's an early employee at Slack, and now, thank goodness that it worked out. But the thing that has historically and still would scare me the most about starting a new company is that ending, and not the investors. Sorry, I don't give a fuck. That's your business. You raise money from the LPs, and it's not to say that I don't. Obviously I'm motivated by doing a good job. But it is that's part of the business, right? You're going to write some of them down to zero, and that's the way it goes. I feel a little bit differently about customers. It's a pretty big disappointment to have to do that, but it's so much worse for the people. But we did make that decision early enough. We still had $5 million left. That put us in a position where, for our customers, we could give them the choice of their money back, or they could just let us keep it, or we would donate it to one of 3 charities, and they could choose. For the employees, we stepped back and took a month doing kind of resume counseling and built a website, like a portal, to make sure that everyone got jobs, and we gave them very generous severance. And before we moved on to Slack, we had made sure that everyone got another job. And I think that really, being in a strong enough position when we decided to shut it down to be able to do that definitely helped, because there was a lot of goodwill that came from that. And also, it wasn't quite as traumatic for everyone who stuck around, because there's 8 people who stayed with the company to start working on Slack. And I think it would have been just too depressing to keep going because we lost all these colleagues. So this is a great, again, aren't you glad you bought your ticket for Startup Grind and then waited all afternoon for this?
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully it's therapeutic for some people.
It's therapeutic for me. That was a tough time for me. Tell me a little bit about why Slack, why now? If you think about enterprise communication, messaging, all of these different attempts at trying to become this really important workflow for businesses, so many have failed to take root in small businesses or the enterprise. Why Slack? Why now?
So I have now a pat answer for this. The short answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the totally honest one. The long answer is a whole bunch of factors.
By the way, do you see how I'm setting this up for the rise of the Phoenix?
Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry.
So it's going to get really inspirational and positive now.
All right. This is where we turn the corner. The music changes.
Yeah.
many things. So one of them is the rise of messaging apps. A lot of people in the audience appear to be younger, and it might be something that you just grew up with. There's also people who are older and had a BlackBerry for a long time or used instant messaging apps back in the early 2000s. But for the majority of human beings, messaging is a thing that only arrived for them after they got their first smartphone. And it seems like smartphones have been with us forever, but most Americans didn't have one in 2008 or 2009. Most didn't have it in 2010. I think it was 2011 where we got more than 50% penetration. So it's like a really new thing for us. It just took over so fast that we failed to notice that. So messaging was a category of software that made sense to people. So a messaging app for Teams was something that had an opportunity in 2013, 2014, 2015, which it wouldn't have had before. So in other words, if we had launched exactly the same product 3 years earlier, I don't think it would have taken off the way it did. Another one, and this is a little bit more macro trend, and for you entrepreneurs, it's a good thing to listen to, I think. 20 years ago, most companies that were small got most of their software from Microsoft. And unless you're like a big company, you got most of your software from SAP or Oracle or something like that. And the number of software product categories has proliferated in this insane way since then. We're a company now of 385 people, and we buy software from like 80 different vendors. So I mean like accounting software, IT asset management, marketing analytics, business intelligence, document editing and collaboration, project management tools, bug tracking, source control, application performance monitoring, continuous integration testing, and so on. Like there's just so many categories of software that didn't exist before, and it's crazy. Like there's so much, and information ends up scattered into all these different tools because you want. First of all, no one makes a suite that covers all of that stuff, obviously, but also you choose the tool that's the best in its category, and messaging is the one kind of application that could bring all those things together. I think it'll be Slack isn't the only opportunity that will be born off of that trend.
Right.
And then there's like timing and goodwill and like little, like almost impossible to predict connections and stuff like that. The fact that we did have that goodwill going into it, I think makes a difference. The fact that we had some credibility from the Flickr days made some difference. The fact that we knew a lot of people at other startups and we begged them to please try Slack and then persisted until they did. In some cases that took many months to get the first half dozen people using it. Those are the big ones.
How much do you think, I mean, if you look again at your history, social networking has been a big foundation of your entrepreneurial activity. Flickr in many ways was one of the first social networks, and in some ways, Slack is the equivalent to your business social network. What about social networking and the interaction between humans attracts you as an entrepreneur and as a technologist?
So I have a friend named Ben Cervini who's even more philosophical than me. But
that's hard.
He puts it like the history of computing into these categories, where the very first one was application-specific computing. So in other words, you made a computer for a specific purpose, and that might be tabulating the census, or it might be calculating the trajectory of the surface-to-air missiles, or something like that, because like a whole machine was built to serve one application. And then there was this era of document-centric computing, where the locus of interaction was about a document. It's like a doc file, a Word file, an Excel file, a Photoshop file, an image, or text file, whatever, and you double-click on that, and that opens the corresponding application because there's this whole universe of applications. And maybe early 2000s Friendster era, maybe more like 2009 rise of Facebook era, I don't know. But at some point, we entered this new thing, which is relationship-based computing. And I don't know this to be true, but I would posit that most of the CPU cycles in the world are spinning for the purpose of humans communicating with one another. Just partially because voice signals are pretty computationally intensive. And that's the fundamental application of computing technology into the lives of human beings, is to facilitate communication and for people to interact. And it's like this incredibly powerful thing that I don't know as a species that we're fully prepared to deal with yet. In the same way that infinite free calories lead to a country where the incidence of diabetes is 40% or something like that. Yeah. We're probably a little bit too addicted to our smartphones because it's almost impossible not to become a slave to that stuff. Yet this is what all this stuff was for. I mean, this is like, to me, this is what John von Neumann and Alan Turing and like all the foundational work in computer science led up, and this will sound stupid when I say it, but it led up to Facebook. You know, it led up to technology being this tool for mediating relationships between people, to facilitating communication, to the spread of information, to like, you know, to giving us like this supercharged meta brain or collective consciousness.
Talk a little bit about Slack. As I think a lot of people think of it as a communication platform, but in many ways it's becoming more workflow and almost like an operating system for a business. And part of that is, you know, built upon this idea of the Slack platform. And, you know, talk a little bit about how you envision that, you know, today and how you envision it in the future, changing and evolving, and how that could impact the startup community.
Okay, so again, we have 385 people. We probably have 30,000 or so messages written by human beings per day on our team. So they look about 100 messages per person, but we have another 150,000 messages a day that are from machines. And that includes things like every time someone submits a customer support ticket, every time we make a sale, every time someone tweets at the company, every mobile crash report, every one of our daily stats runs, every time a new account is assigned to an account manager. Like the whole business has these giant flows of information that come into Slack. And that's my window into all of that stuff. Like I want to get a sense of how sales are going. I go to the BizOps channel for the stats that pop up every 4 hours, and I go to sales events to see a live feed of sales. If I want to get like a pulse of how we're doing, there's a channel that just posts NPS survey results. There's also like, again, the customer support tickets or the tweets. And then there's like the ones where like the actual workflow, the business process becomes integrated. And a simple example of that is if I want to create a bug for someone at the company inside of Slack, I type /bug at someone's name and then type out a bunch of characters. And then that whole, you know, we still have a separate bug tracker that has its own UI and people will go there and use it sometimes. But the workflow is integrated into Slack so that I assign a bug to Cal gets a notification about it. It also gets posted to the bugs channel. And when Cal does something about it, I'll get a notification about it. And when it's eventually resolved, that'll get posted to the bugs channel. And so all of that stuff is visible to people in a way that it wasn't before. So now you're starting to see startups that are doing things like expense reporting via Slack. So you DM a photo of your receipt to the expense bot and it asks you a couple questions and now you have filed your expense report. Or booking corporate travel, or on-demand office management, or PM bot, which, you know, at a specified time each day will ask a group of people, hey, what are you working on today? And are you blocked on anything? And then it'll collate the results and send them out to people. And there's all kinds of things that there's also like 3 different companies doing performance management via Slack bots today. And those are things that just wouldn't have been possible before. So when you get on one axis all of the people and the communication, the relationships that they have, and another axis, the data and flows of information, and yet like a third axis, the workflows and business processes, that enables this new breed of applications that wouldn't have been possible before. And when we talk about Slack as an operating system, it's much less metaphorical than it would have been.
So 180,000 messages, 30,000 human, 150 for Slack, the company. What role do you think artificial intelligence is going to play in helping to sort through a lot of that communication over time?
I hope a big one, because, you know, one of the, I'm going to have to draw a graph with my hands, but one of the fundamental beliefs about
You're
Slack.
on stage at it.
So
I mean,
that's okay, it's easy. Yeah. So here is like the amount of effort that a company puts into communication over time. And it's like roughly equivalent over, you know, people spend a fixed amount of time reading and writing emails and technical specifications and preparing slide decks and attending meetings and going to all hands and all the things that you do that are communication. And then there's a steady amount of value you get out of that communication. So people do the right thing. Not everyone's doing the same thing at once. You're coordinated. With Slack, when you first try it, and I didn't see when people put their hands up, but many people will have had this experience, I bet. When you first set it up, it's like, no, the effort has gone way up, and there's this giant hump before it settles back down to a steady state, right? Because I don't know how to set up the notifications. This stupid thing is broken. How many channels should we have? Everyone's got to install a new app. Like, it's a big transition. But hopefully, if we're doing it right, over time, the value that you get out of that communication actually increases over time. So when you get further out, like there's this delta between the effort that you're putting in and the value that you're getting out that should increase. And I think one of the shots we have to make that a really big increase instead of a small incremental one is the application of machine learning and AI to the giant corpus of messages that are being developed. So in addition to the PM bot, the expense reporting bot, the scheduling bots, and things like that, there's glossary bots. And inside of any company, there's a bunch of jargon or internal acronyms, and people ask, what does this thing mean? You know, we recently launched group direct messages. Internally, we call them multi-party DMs. And multi-party DMs is too long to type, so we said MPDMs, and then 100 times people would say, what's an MPDM? And so we have a bot that does those definitions. But as you feed it definitions and teach it and correct it, it now has more like little keys that it can use to like make sense of the whole corpus of messages. And ideally, the simple fact-based discussions and question answering sessions that like are probably a quarter of a knowledge worker's day, just getting a bit of information from someone, can be offloaded to bots. And how many of you saw the movie Her? This is so interactive. I like when people put up their hands. So you remember in that movie, there's this moment where she reveals to him that she's simultaneously talking to like 600 other people, and he's kind of heartbroken, and then later on it's thousands and thousands of other people. That's the good thing about an AI approach to this stuff. That's a good thing about a computer. It's a good thing about a bot, is it doesn't get tired. It doesn't go to sleep. It can handle many, many people asking it questions simultaneously. It's not going to get irritated like, you know, if you ask me a question at 4:30 in the afternoon on a Friday, then it doesn't really matter what the question is. I'm already irritated with you.
Right.
But bots don't have that experience. So I think there's a real amazing potential. And if you look longer out, like I don't mean this is not 2017 or 2019. This is maybe 10 years from now. The next software product category on the order of value that Office has been in terms of longevity and total dollars, like hundreds of billions of dollars over the course of decades, is going to be team-based AI, because it's such an amazingly powerful concept. And I'll riff just a tiny bit more on that. People talk about the consumerization of enterprise, and one thing that I think people don't get is when we talk about that, it's not just that the UI is nicer or that it's simpler to provision or it's easier or more user-friendly or something like that, which I think is what people have meant by consumerization of enterprise for a long time. That's kind of a baseline, a standard, something that you have to meet in order for software to be accepted by people. Like it has to look good and it has to be well designed. There's this other thing that happened in the consumer world that still hasn't happened in the enterprise, and that's like Google Maps, from the perspective of someone who's old enough to have like pulled into a gas station and buy a map of the state you're in when you're on a road trip, like to be able to pinch zoom and see like that this street is one way and what the traffic is like right now and that this Chinese restaurant closes at 10 p.m. and like this is what it looks like inside of Macy's, it's crazy. Like I get a third of the way typing a query in Google and it's like already now it knows what I was going to ask. And I hit enter, and like 400 milliseconds later, it's one box the result for me. The experience of finding and dealing with information at work is not like that. It's like, fuck, I have now spent 3 hours looking for the stupid link that someone sent me yesterday, and I just can't find it. Or like I'm looking for this doc or whatever. Part of that is just Google has a billion whatever users, and every one of us uses it a lot, so it has like trillions of data points, and it also has everyone in the world talking about everything in the world, and it has the whole web pointing at itself to feed the algorithms. Whereas inside of a company, you have a relatively small number of people talking about a relatively small number of very prescribed things. Like if your company is 1,000 people, you probably only talk about 10,000 different things inside of the company. Whereas in the internet, people are talking about like literally quarks and leptons to planets and galaxies, and like Gwen Stefani to like the Battle of 1812 or whatever, like just everything in the world. So that's something that's really exciting to me, is when that kind of experience, that kind of magic technology makes its way into the enterprise, that'll be a very profound shift.
We only have a couple more minutes.
Okay.
So failure has its set of challenges. We talked about some of those.
Yep.
Success has its set of challenges as well. And so now as you enter into the next phase of Slack and its growth, What are some of the challenges that you, as the CEO and co-founder of the company, are dealing with every day, and how are you managing through that?
So one thing that's true, and this could totally be an artifact of my particular personality, I don't know, that it sucks to be the CEO of a failing startup. In a totally different way, it kind of sucks to be the CEO of a startup that's doing super well, because the pressure just increases and the stakes get higher and higher, and every decision is that much more important, and more people are counting on you, and like more and more attention is on it. So like the amount of pressure is super intense. So that's the biggest challenge for me. The thing that I worry about, I'm very confident about the product. I'm very confident about the size of the market. I'm very confident about our ability to market it. We're an incredibly customer-centric company, and it shows, and that's why people love it. And there's like so many positive feedback loops there. The thing that I worry about is people. At the beginning of 2015, we were 80 people. At the end, we were 320. And that was the end of 2015, by the way, was like 6-7 weeks ago, and now we're 385 people.
Yeah.
So that kind of growth, which is necessary to keep up with the scale of the business, because the number of people is growing much slower than the business, is very difficult to do without the wheels coming off. Without, like, God love us, people are terrible. Like underneath everything, we're all, and like you get a bunch of people together, it's Lord of the Flies. Like we'll just. And we revert to like these, like the basest kinds of behaviors. So like you need to really have the volume up. Like people need to be able to hear what the values are, what the opportunity is like, what the mission is, and it's got to be repeated. And cultural problems need to be addressed as they arise. And like it's just hard to get people into alignment to do something, despite the fact that hey, they get to work at Slack, and Slack's a super hot company, and your equity is going to be worth a lot, and all that kind of stuff. It's still hard to get like people aligned. So that the biggest challenge is humans. And I'm not complaining about these. We have a wonderful group of people. We have a great group of managers. Like I think we're in the best possible case, and yet that is still the hardest problem.
So leave the audience with Slack's 5 values.
6.
6 plus the one that you added.
Bonus
the
value.
Bonus one.
I put them.
I was
into
testing
pairs.
you.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I put them into pairs. They are empathy as expressed through courtesy. So those are 2. Craftsmanship tempered with playfulness, and I think that the playfulness shows up, I think, in just the way that we position ourselves and then like how we conduct ourselves on Twitter and things like that. It's not silly or slapstick, but it's like creative and open and stuff like that. And then the last one is a little bit harder to explain, but thriving both in ourselves and others. So the last quality is solidarity, but the second to last one, thriving, is like doing the thing that you're meant to be doing with your whole heart. And like the symbol of this inside the company is this is too long of a story, but the short version is I was in Wyoming in the hills, and there's a bunch of hunters coming back, and they had a bunch of horses, and in front of all the horses was this dog, and this was like the most alive dog you have ever seen in your life. It was running ahead of the horses, turning around at them, barking, like waiting for them, running ahead again, running, like scampering down the side of the cliff, barking at a particular horse and running back. And like the dog was doing exactly what it meant to be doing. Like the tongue was hanging out, it was like full of life. And in contrast, I had a terrible indoor dog that like was super unhappy and was never doing the things that a dog was meant to be doing, and as a result, did not have that kind of life. So like for most people, there is a thing that makes them like just alive and happy and feel like they're fulfilling their purpose. Doesn't really matter what the purpose is, it can be anything, right? But that they are doing the work that they're meant to be doing. So,
well, thank you very much, Stewart Butterfield. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.